My solid state drive died. I'm on a hard disk drive with the engine and recording software. Let's hope. Hello everybody and welcome back to creating a horror game from scratch. Today we're going to be taking a leap in the logic we're going to be doing. We went from some pretty basic stuff to things that I would consider a bit more advanced. However, that being said, I don't want you to panic because I'm going to be going through it with you step by step. We're going to make a basic AI. Before we jump into that though, I wanted to correct something from the last video. Not necessarily correct something, but include information I left out and I shouldn't have. When you're using the cube grid, especially whenever you want to potentially use the objects that you're creating, I want to show you something that can save you a lot of time before we jump into the AI. If you remember, I said to be careful whenever you're creating multiple things, because if you edit, or if you use one, duplicate it, edit the last one, they're both going to change. But there is a rule or an exception to that. Something you can do, for example, is make a 300 by 300 tile like this, but like let's make it flat so that way, or smaller so that way it's like the floor. And then as long as you're aware that that tile is meant as nothing more than a floor piece, what you can do is make sure your snapping is on up here at the top right. I like to put it at about 10 when I'm dealing with tiles. And then if I alt drag, I can start to just piece together pieces of floor like this. And I would only have to apply the material to one. It'll apply it to all of them. And you can start to build out levels using tiles instead of every individual piece. And I thought I should include that, especially if you put a lot of time into modeling something in the cube grid. I wish this was in the last video. I apologize. Let's hop into the AI. Okay, we're about to go through a lot of parts, and it's going to be pretty complicated. I'm going to do my best. As you can see, I went ahead and made a very simple 2-room setup using the tile method. You'll see that I've got just different tiles for the walls and stuff. And then for doors, I just made another type of tile. And this guy here is just our reference. He is not the AI. We can actually go ahead and delete him. And the first thing I want to show you, and it might seem out of order, but just run with me here, is up here at the top left on the quickly add to project. I am going to open that up. And I'm going to go down here to the volumes. And within volumes, you'll see that there's one called a nav mesh bounds volume. We're going to go ahead and pull that out into our world. Now, it just looks like a random box, and there's not much going on with it. So we can see what it's doing. I'm going to press P on the keyboard. And all of a sudden, you'll note that an area starts to turn green, specifically where the box is located. And when I move it, notice it doesn't update in real time. That's because what it's doing is it's processing and trying to understand the places the AI is capable of going. Let's go ahead and drag it to the middle of the wall. And you'll note that it's doing its best to figure out where the AI can go versus where it can't. Right now, it's very inaccurate. That being said, if we're lucky, it'll default, yes, it will default letting it go through the doorway. Don't worry, we'll cover how to fix it if it doesn't. So obviously, we don't want to have to make 100 of these to fill up our map. So on the right-hand side, with the nav mesh bounds volume selected, just go ahead and scroll down, and you'll see we have a brush settings. Let's go ahead and expand that to fit our area. Also, while we do this, I just want to let you guys know that I highly, highly recommend that you make a separate level for prototyping stuff like this. And the reason simply comes down to the fact that these levels are significantly easier on your computer, meaning you're able to multitask easier and things just process faster. Just trust me. Plus, you can quickly make edits and test things whenever you're in a small environment like this. Now on the Z, you'll note that I'm not making it super tall. It doesn't need to be. In fact, it's already too tall. And the reason this is important is because a lot of times when we make our games, we're going to have a lot of static mesh, things like tables and stuff. Now, if you want your AI to be able to step up that high, then yes, you can leave this tall. It will make the green on top of the table, and they can probably get on top of it. But for the most part, that is not what you want. However, you'll notice something weird. Notice that all of a sudden it's going through the wall here, and I think it's because it's not tall enough now. So what I'm going to do is bring it back up to like 75. I'll be honest, I actually don't know why it's ignoring the wall. That's very interesting. It was a height issue though. I brought it back up and it did recalculate the wall. If yours disappears and is wanting to go through a wall, well, one, make sure it's actually got collision, and two, it probably has something to do with the bounds volume being too low. Okay, cool. So we have a nice little area for our pawn to be able to walk around. However, we don't have a pawn, so let's create one. I'm gonna hit Control Space, and I'm gonna go over to my dark BPs. We're gonna go into Actors. And within Actors, I'm going to create an additional folder because there's a lot of components. So I'm going to just go ahead and name this like Enemies, or you can name it Allies, you can name it AI, whatever you want. I'm going to open that up. And within Enemies, the first thing I'm going to do is create the 3 main pieces to any AI. The first piece is going to be the physical piece, the piece that can interact with things, the thing that can swing and attack your pawn. In order to do that, we're going to right click and go to Blueprint Class. And I know there's a pawn here, but we're actually going to go to Character. The difference between a pawn and a character is a character by default can walk around. Makes our life a little easier. Let's go ahead and click on Character, and I'm going to name this BPC, because we know it's a character, _ enemy. I recommend being a bit more specific, especially if you're going to have multiple, but I don't, so I'm just going to do enemy. Immediately Control-Shift-S to save all. So that's the physical piece. Now we need a sensory piece. The eyeballs, the ears, the taste. I don't think the AI can taste. The point is the sensory element. To do that, we're going to right-click. Now we're going to go to Artificial Intelligence. And oh wait, no we're not. We're gonna go to Blueprint Class, and it won't be up here. What we need to do is open up all classes, and within all classes, you are going to type in AI space controller. And now you'll see that we have AI controller. Now you have detour and grid, don't worry about those right now. We are just going to get the AI controller, so go ahead and click it and hit select. I'm gonna call this AIC for AI controller _ enemy, because in this case it can be a bit more generic, but I'm not going to get into that because it's going to make it more complicated. Just name it something like AIC enemy. I'm going to be straightforward with you. We aren't going to do 100% best practices. Your first AI, if you've never done this, is not going to be the best AI you're ever going to make. So some of the stuff I teach you is going to be a little bit more hardwired than I prefer. I like modular, I like fluidity, I like things to be able to work in every scenario. This is your first AI. Let's just make it your first AI, okay? So we have the physical piece. We now have sensory, but now we need a brain. Something that can take the sensory input, make decisions, and then send it to the physical aspect to act on. For example, I see the player through my AI controller. The AI controller is going to tell the piece we're about to make, the brain, hey, we see the player. The brain is going to say, oh, I know what to do because I'm a brain and I can make decisions. Go to the player. That is a behavior tree. So let's go ahead and right click. We're going to go to Artificial Intelligence and create a behavior tree. Now, the behavior tree is going to be called BT for behavior tree _ something along the lines of enemy, or whatever yours is going to be. These are the 3 main components. And you'll realize why I'm specifying these so hard as we go forward. The character, the physical piece. The AI controller, the sensory piece. I hear things, I see things. The behavior tree, the brain, the decision maker. We're going to have a lot of information flowing around, so it's important we understand what each of these branches is responsible for so we know where to put the information. There's one last thing we need to create. I didn't include it in the main 3 because it's sort of the cousin to the behavior tree. It's a necessity, but I don't want to get this too convoluted. For now, just know that we also need to right click. We need to go to artificial intelligence and create something called a blackboard. Go ahead and call this BB and something along the lines of enemy. Just understand, we'll get to it, but for now, understand that the blackboard is required for the behavior tree to work. It's 2 in the same, but it's its own thing. We'll get there. Everyone on board? Raise your hand if you've got questions. I can already tell you this is going to be a multi-part series. Let's start with the pawn. So what I'm going to do, and by the way, when I say pawn, I could also mean character. A character is a pawn with movement capabilities. So when I say pawn, that is what I mean. So let's go ahead and open up the BPC enemy. You'll note that we start with a capsule component. That is basically the physical representation of its bounds. We have an arrow. This is nothing more than to show us which way the pawn is facing whenever we're developing. This will not be there whenever you are playing. We have an empty skeletal mesh we can use. And we have a character movement, which we can specify how fast it moves and all things like that. But if you're like me, you might not have a skeletal mesh and animations to use. There's tons of resources you can use, but we're going to use one in particular today called Mixamo. Everything on Mixamo is free for commercial use. Suggested it's in a project. You're not selling the models individually or the animations. So we're going to pick something, preferably in the characters. We're going to be making a horror game. So let's go ahead and just pick something scary. I don't know. Do they have a zombie? Ooh, they have all kinds of zombies in here. I really like this guy. If this pops up, just go ahead and hit use this character, and you'll see that he'll show up over here on the right hand side. And now we have a character that we can use, at least for prototyping. I would highly recommend you eventually get your own model, but if you can't, you can use these. Now that we have a character, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and download. So if you click on download, what you're going to want is just go ahead and leave it on FBX binary for the FBX. And we can just do the T-pose, and we're going to hit download. In my content drawer, I'm going to go over to imported. It is CC0, so we're going to go ahead and open that up. We're going to create a separate folder. I'm going to call this Mixamo. We're going to go ahead and open that up. And it's as simple as taking that FBX and dragging it in. You'll note that we got a folder here. We can leave everything to the default and just hit import all. You may get a warning about smoothing groups. Don't worry about it. With that, we can go ahead and hit Control Space and take a look at what we got. You can see we got a skeletal mesh, the physical asset, the skeleton, some textures, materials, and it's all put together. So we have our guy. With it just being imported, you'll see all the little stars on here. We need to do a Control-Shift-S to save all. Make sure it gets nice and saved into the project. And with it saved, let's go ahead and go over here to our skeletal mesh. And on the right hand side, you'll see that we can pick a skeletal mesh asset. You can go ahead and open this up and select one, or you can actually just click on the skeletal mesh. With it selected in the content browser, you can actually press this arrow and it will add our skeletal mesh to the pawn. You'll want to drag your skeletal mesh down so that way it fits. Specifically, you want the feet, the bottom of the feet, to be right at the bottom of your capsule component. Typically, you can actually just use the access point and place it right on where the grid or the crossing is here, and that will fit just fine. You'll see he's a bit larger, so we'll fix that in a minute. But for now, as you can see, he's also turned the wrong direction. So I'm going to press E, and we're going to turn him 90 degrees to his left. And there we go. He is now facing the correct direction, and the arrow is in an unfortunate position. We're going to go ahead and hit Control-Shift-S and compile to make sure this is nice and saved. However, he looks kind of menacing, but I don't think we want him T-posing. So let's go back to Mixamo. On Mixamo, what we'll do is we'll keep our character selected. We're gonna head over here to animations, and there is an excellent naming convention going on. We have a zombie, so if we just start typing in zombie blank, we can start to get things for zombies. For example, I've already got zombie searched, but it's suggesting we got zombie idol here, which honestly, he looks pretty good with zombie idol. If you don't like it, you could try this other zombie idol. You'll see he's looking around a bit more. This looks like something you might want to call occasionally in your animation blueprint. So that way he's mostly like this, and then occasionally maybe does a quick paranoid look around. Kind of depends on what you're going for. However, the two that I'm going to get for the current prototyping purposes is I'm going to get this zombie idol here. I think it looks pretty decent. What I'm going to do is I'm going to press download. Now, you're going to see we're getting another FBX. That's fine. And then skin, we do not want the skin. All we want is the data for the animation, not the model. Frames per second, I'm going to go ahead and bump this up to 60. You can leave it at 30, but animations just look better whenever there's more frames, and this is a simple model, so bumping it to 60 shouldn't be too bad. And we're going to press download. Other than idle, let's go ahead and get two more. We got the idle. Now we'll get a run. Now you'll note that he's running forward. Make sure you press in place. So that's what he's going to look like running. I'm okay with that. That looks pretty decent. Again, we're going to press download. The binary without skin, 60 and none. Again, make sure in place is checked and hit download. So we have idle and we have running. Let's go ahead and get walking as well. So we've got, oh, by the way, they have packs. Like if you just want to download a pack, you can. I'm not for the time being. I'm going to add zombie walk and just get a zombie-esque walk here. He doesn't really have a limp, so I'm going to go with this first one. I'm going to go ahead and make sure it says in place. Lets me see it better, and that's what we need anyway. And I like it. So when he's just like chilling, that's how he'll walk around. So we're going to go ahead and again press download, FBX, no skin, 60. Now, I'm actually going to create some additional folders here to keep things more organized. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a folder within Mixamo called Zombie, since this is our zombie guy, and we're going to drag all this into there. Within Zombie, I'm going to create another folder, and I'm just going to call it Materials, and we're going to grab all the material stuff here, including the textures, because those are just elements of the material, and we're going to drag that into the Materials folder. And we're already starting to get a much more organized folder structure. I'm going to create one more, and we're going to call this Anims, which is just short for animations. And we're actually going to open that one up. With it open, we're going to go ahead and pull open the folder that has our animations we just got, and we're going to drag those straight in. Now on this one, as you'll see, we do need to do something because we can't directly import them. This is because we have to choose a skeleton. In this case, we know what it's going to be. It is going to be our guy we just did, which is the Parasite L Starkey skeleton, or at least for me, that's what it is. So I'm going to click it, and we're going to import all. And bam, just like that, we have a idle, running, and walk. Remember to Control-Shift-S, because you just changed a bunch of files by importing. Make sure those all get saved. We have animations, but our pawn would not know how to use them, because we have walk, we have run, and we have idle. But it doesn't know what those are. What we need to do on the right hand side, you'll see in animation mode, we have use animation blueprint. So we need to make an animation blueprint so it knows what to do and when. So I'm going to hit Control Space, and within Anims, I'm going to right click, and I'm going to go to animation, and we're going to go to animation blueprint. You have to choose a skeleton. So I'm going to be picking the skeleton I'm using, which is the Parasite L Starkey. And I'm going to call this ABP for animation blueprint. I'm going to do an underscore, and I'm just going to call this enemy, because that is what I've pretty much named everything so far. Normally, by the way, highly recommend you rename your animations. Like you'll see I have zombie idol and all this. That is not the correct naming conventions. In fact, I'm going to do it because it's just good practice. So I'm going to do AS for animation sequence underscore enemy underscore idle, and I'm going to do that for the other two. There we go. Control-Shift-S to make sure those are saved. And let's go ahead and open up the animation blueprint and start talking about what's going on in here. So by default, you'll see that we have an event graph and an anim graph. And in the anim graph, which should be the default location you're placed, you'll see that we have an out pose that has a note. The note is that currently no animation will play. So technically, I'm pretty sure you could do this. I could bring over the idle, drop it into the anim graph and plug it straight in. And whenever I hit compile, you'll see that it immediately starts playing the idle animation. Why? Because it's literally the only logic we have. But that's not what we want. So we're going to grab that and hit delete. We need to add some logic so that way it can make decisions on what animation to play. In order to do that, we need to right click and we're going to create something called a state machine. So what is the point of a state machine? A state machine is basically kind of like the name implies. It is a state that the pawn is in. So maybe they're driving a car, maybe they're running around, maybe they're flying. Those are different states that you would have different state machines for. For us, especially with something simple like a zombie AI, what we're going to do is we're going to rename this and we're just going to call this locomotion, like that. So locomotion, and we can plug that straight in, by the way, and it won't do anything because there's no logic. Locomotion just basically means it's moving around in a default state, right? If it was like a car locomotion, we would state that. But let's go ahead and then on the state machine, you can actually open it. The state machine is where we make decisions based on the state we're in. So for example, now we have an entry. This is basically where it starts to figure out where it needs to go. Well, we know that by default, if nothing's happening, we can pull out our idle state and we can go straight into it. Why? Because for idle, there's no conditions. Whenever we're idle, we don't need to be moving. We don't need anything. If we're not doing anything, there's no conditions, we're idle. But you'll notice on the left-hand side here, by the way, that he stopped. Notice he's not moving anymore. So that is because animations by default do not loop. We're going to double click on the thing we just created. It's going to open it up here. And on the right-hand side, if it's not there, make sure you have enemy idle selected. And what we need to do is loop the animation and then hit compile. And now it will go through the entire loop. You'll see it goes to the end here and back to the beginning. And now the idle animation will loop. And that's it. So that's really basic logic to get idle working. So let's go back to our character and let's select the animation class we created. You'll see that there's a bunch here that's like default for the mannequins. We want the enemy because that's what we created. And look, it knows now. It knows that it's idle and it knows that's the animation to play. However, we need to know when we're walking and when we're running. So to do that, we're going to create something called a blend space. The reason we're not just going to immediately plug in running and walking is because it would work like a switch. The animation would be walking, running, and it would look very, very jarring. You would see that immediate switch. So what we're going to do is create a blend space that kind of blends that animation together. So what I'm going to do is in our anims folder, I'm going to right click and I'm going to create a animation. We'll go up to animation and click on blend space and choose your skeleton. I'm going to call it ABS for animation blend space. And I'm going to hit underscore enemy underscore idle dash run. So basically, that naming convention is saying we are an animation blend space for the enemy. This is idle to run. So we're going to open that up. So you're met with this screen. At the bottom here, you'll see this like weird grid going on. On the left, you got a bunch of details. On the right, you got some details, but we also have access now to different animations here. What we need to do specifically, if we're not going to have strafing, which for your first blend space, I would not recommend trying to do strafing. We're going to open up vertical axis here. And you see where it says name? I am going to change that to speed. Then what we're going to do is on the minimum axis value, we're going to keep that as 0. That's when we're idle. And then for the maximum, it depends on how fast you want your character to go. I believe by default, Unreal has 600 being the max speed. And you'll note that we have something called smoothing time. Just know this is how quickly it will go between one animation to another, regardless of the value. For example, if the value went from 0 to 600 in one frame, we would still snap because right now it's set to 0. So we will be messing with that in a moment. However, what I'm going to do is, you see how we have idle? I'm going to click it and drag it onto our grid. I'm not letting go yet. And if I hold shift, you'll see that it starts to snap to the grid. So I'm going to bring it to the middle and all the way down. So what that's saying is we are at 0 speed, because if you look on the left-hand side here, you'll see speed 0, which is one of the values that we set up here. And then the top being 600, which is the value we set here. So when we are at 0, we are idle. We're going to go ahead and grab running, and I'm going to hold shift. Oh, wait, no, I apologize. Grab walking, and I'm going to hold shift. And I'm going to put that somewhere in the middle, okay? So basically what's going to happen now is as we approach 300 speed, we're going to start walking. To test this, if you hold control and move your mouse, you'll see what it's going to do. Whenever it's at about 150 speed, look how slow it is. It's like, but then if we go up to 300, now it's at the maximum walking speed. It's saying, okay, now we're walking, we're going. Now let's take running, and we're going to put that at 600. So then if you hold control and slowly move up, you'll see that it starts to change more to the run and less of the walk. So what this is doing is it's blending these together, so that way the monster actually kind of transitions to these animations instead of just immediately snapping. So you'll see how quick it can move. Right now, because we're on 0, if you put the X at the bottom here by holding control, and then you press control at the top, instant. It didn't even try to wait. So we want to add a little bit of smoothing time. So I put it at 1, that's a bit too high. Let's go ahead and put it at like 0.5. So these values are not very big, but at 0.5, go ahead and put it at the bottom, then hold control and bring it to the top. That was actually pretty fast. Let's go to 0.75 maybe. We're at the top, let's go to the bottom. There we go. So you see how it actually, it's a little bit less snappy. It's actually trying to go through these. It's like, actually, you know what? I'm even gonna bring it up to 1. Let's see what that does. There we go. Now, these set of animations are a little strange because obviously if your character is got his arms out here, but when he sprints, he drops them. You'll notice that it looks a little weird when he goes from 0 to max. Like he'll go, brah, because he's trying to go transition between these. Now, if I was making my own game and this was the only asset I had available, I would probably just remove the smoothing time. I would just let it snap. And the reason for that is because I wouldn't want it to, go to this and then this. So honestly, what I might do is if we were to take this here and press delete, now it would go from sprint to idle. So it would look like this instead. So walking would look like this. You can tell that the default anim is trying to sprint just because we know that. But I feel like if you were playing a game, you might not realize. We know because we know what the full animation looks like. But if we took that smoothing time, made it like 0.5 or even 0.75, this is going to look a lot better. So if we put this at like sprint and then he has to stop and then idle to sprint. Yeah, that looks a lot better. So it depends on yours. I wanted to debug it in front of you because I wanted you to see the process in choosing how this is going to look. And I'm going to hit Control-Shift-S and make sure that this blend space is saved. All right, back to the blueprint, the animation blueprint. We are still in the idle state where we set it to loop. So at the top here, don't get out of any of these graphs, by the way. It's kind of a pain to get back into them. If you did, I honestly don't even remember how to get them back. You can. You might have to Google it. Don't close them. What you want to do is you'll see we have little like folder structure here. So exit this and go back to locomotion, which if you remember is the state we're in. We're in the locomotion state, which is the default state for us. And now if you look on the right hand side, you'll see that we actually have the blend space as something we can drag out. So, oh, that's not what I wanted. I wanted the blend space. So now whenever we're either idle or we're running the blend space for going from idle up to run. So if I drag this and pull it over, you'll see that two things happen. One, we have a line here. Two, it's staying in idle, notice that. And three, we now have this thing here. What this is this is the condition. This is saying you can't go across this line unless X happens. This is where the logic starts to happen to choose different animations. So what we need to do is calculate our speed because we need to know how fast we're moving. Otherwise, the blend space won't work because it doesn't know. And also we need to know if we're moving because we need to know if we need to transition from idle over to the blend space. So let's head to the event graph. We're in locomotion, we're moving to the event graph. You'll note that the first thing that happens is we have the event blueprint update animation. This happens pretty much every frame. You can think of it kind of like an event tick. And then we have try get pawn owner, and both of these are crucial, which is why we start with them. So the first thing I'm going to do on try get pawn owner is I'm going to pull out and immediately promote this to variable and make that the first thing we do. Now don't worry, some of you that know coding or programming might already see a huge issue, which is this gets called every frame. Uh-oh, are we really gonna set this every frame? No, don't worry, we'll get to that. What we're gonna do on the left-hand side is we're gonna click on that new variable that was just created. We're gonna press F2 and we are going to name this whatever you want. I'm just gonna call mine pawn underscore enemy because in this case, it is going to be the enemy pawn. And now I'm going to unplug the execution pin. I am going to grab pawn enemy out and do a get. We're going to right click and we're going to do a convert to validated get. And I'll explain what this does. So the reason I did it like I did is because we're using context, so it's just easier. We created a variable using the try get pawn owner. And then we grabbed that variable and we did a validated get. The reason we did that is because what we're going to do now is if we try to get our pawn and it's not valid, which means it hasn't been set yet, so it's not valid, we're going to drop down and we are going to set our pawn by trying to get the owner that is our pawn. If it is valid, we'll skip and continue forward. So I'm going to go ahead and hit Control-Shift-S and compile just to make sure everything is hunky-dory. You'll note that you'll get a warning, don't worry. This is simply saying if we go back to locomotion, it's mad that we haven't set a condition. And because we haven't set a condition, it's permanently idle. And that warning is just saying, hey, you have animations that aren't gonna run, so don't worry. Let's go back to the event graph. So obviously right now it's pretty much never going to be valid because it's never going to be able to set this because we're not running the game. So right now it's going to constantly run down is not valid. Don't panic, it's fine. However, if you remember, we want to set speed. We need to keep an eye on our speed. So what I'm gonna do is on the left-hand side here, we are going to create a variable. We're going to call it speed and it's going to be a float. And we're gonna hit compile and save just so we have access to that pawn or that variable. And what we're gonna do is, just so you know, whenever you set something, you can also use the exit pin as a reference to that variable. So don't worry, you'll see why I'm saying that in a second. So what we're gonna do is out of the pawn enemy is we are going to drag out and just simply get velocity. If you spell it correctly anyway. So there we go, we got our velocity. And out of our velocity, we are going to get vector length. Or actually, you don't even need to type get, I think it's just vector length, yeah. And this is how you calculate speed, everyone. You get what you need, you see what its velocity is, and you get the vector length, and that will tell you its current speed. So what we can do is pull speed out and do a set. that vector length is going to be the speed. And if it is valid, we just need to make sure we're keeping an eye on the speed. If it's not valid, we need to set it, and then we need to set our speed. So this is why I wanted to let you know this is just a reference to the variable. Yes, we're setting it, but even if we're not setting it, like, so let's say it's valid and it goes straight to here, this is still just a reference to the variable. So by pulling out here and getting the velocity and vector length is the same thing as just referencing the variable. And I just want to make that very clear because it can probably be confusing, but that's what's happening. Let's go ahead and compile and save. So let's head back to locomotion because now we're keeping track of our pawn's speed. So what we need to do is let's go ahead and double click on our condition here. You can see right now, this is where the warning's coming from because it never has a reason to transition. So what we need to do is we need to pull out speed, do a get, and I just want to make sure that it is greater. So just greater, not equal to, it's greater than 0. And we'll plug that into the result. Grab it all, press Q so it's nice and straight, press compile and save. So basically, if our speed is greater than 0, we're moving. So whenever we go back to locomotion up here, now if our speed is greater than 0, we can transition into the blend space where we're going to start calculating, you know, how fast we're going, thus what it looks like whenever we're moving. However, we need to set that up as well. So let's double click on the blend space. Now you'll see that 1, there's a none, and 2, there's a speed. That's because each axis is still present because it's a grid by default, so it has 2 axes. We're only using the vertical, which is why speed's the only one that's there, which is fine because we're not even looking at none in the blend space. Let's go ahead and grab speed and plug that in to the blend space here. Grab them all, press Q. So now the blend space is also keeping a track on our speed. However, there's one thing we still need to do. Let's go back to locomotion, and we need to be able to re-enter the idle state. To do this, you'll see all I did was drag back instead of forward, and it gave us another condition. So let's go ahead and double click the condition. Again, we're going to get our speed. In this case, we're going to say equal. We want this to be equal to 0. If it is equal to 0, we are allowed to transition back into our idle state. So I hope this is all making sense. That is our animation blueprint set up. So I'm going to hit Control-Shift-S, make sure it's compiled, and close the animation blueprint for now. And right now our character can't move because this is where we're going to have to start getting into the other components. I'm going to try to make the next 2 episodes as fast as I humanly can. I have a new job and my hard drive or my solid state just died and everything is pain and I'm trying my best. But I have to end this episode here and we will jump into the actual AI part next time. Thank you all so much for the support. I'll see you guys in the next episode. Have a good one.